councillors, staff and members of the public, and I declare the council meeting of Glamorgan Spring Bay Council open at 2:16 p.m. The Glamorgan Spring Bay Council acknowledges the traditional owners of our region and recognises their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Everyone's present apart from one apology from Annie Browning. Are there any late reports?
No reports.
Declaration of interest or conflict. I request you to indicate whether you have any interest personally or via a close associate as defined in Section 49 of the Local Government Act 1993, or any conflict as described in the Council's Code of Conduct for Councillors in any item included in the agenda. No declarations of interest or conflict. Confirmation of minutes, Ordinary Council Meeting 27 July 2021. Can I have a motion, please? Grant Robinson. Thank you.
That the minutes of the ordinary meeting of Council held on Tuesday 27th of July 2021 at 2 p.m. be confirmed as a true and correct record.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Woods. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Now, the next item is 2.2, date and purposes of workshop held. There's a detail of the workshop set on page 6 of the agenda. Can I have a motion? Deputy Mayor Woods.
Yes, I'll move that Council notes the information.
Seconder. Councillor Breeny. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Next item is public question time on page 7. There are no questions without notice or questions on notice. So I move on to the next agenda. Planning Authority section. Can I have a motion relating to Council acting as Councillor Arnold?
Thank you. I'll move that Council now acts as a planning authority at 2:20 p.m.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Breeny. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 4.1, Development Application 35 Jetty Road, Coles Bay. There is a report there. Can I have a motion? Councillor Churchill.
I move that pursuant to Section 57 of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993 and the Glamorgan Spring Bay Interim Planning Scheme 2015, Development Application 2021/132 for the construction of a dwelling at CT 55545/4 be refused for the following reasons. A. The proposal presents an unreasonable loss of amenity by virtue of presenting incongruous bulk in relation to its surroundings when viewed from an adjoining lot. B. The proposal presents a divergence of site coverage rates, which by comparison to that of existing dwellings in the vicinity is out of character with the pattern of development in the surrounding area. And C. The proposal fails to demonstrate the manner in which stormwater will be effectively managed, noting the absence of either a stormwater connection, the use of on-site soakage devices, collection for reuse, or adequate disposal of stormwater infrastructure by use of a pump.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Robinson. Is there any discussion?
Yes, just
Councillor Churchill.
thank you, Mayor. As the mover of the motion, I think everything that needs to be said from my point of view is actually in within that motion, in A, B and C of that motion. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Well, I put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Next item is 4.2, request to amend Southern Tasmanian Regional Land Use Strategy. Can I have a recommendation? Any comers for a recommendation? There is a suggested recommendation on page 34.
34, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that the Planning Authority submit a request to the Minister for Planning to amend the Southern Tasmanian Regional Land Use Strategy 2010-2035 under 5A of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993 by making the following changes to Table 3 Growth Management Strategies on page 89 for Orford. 1. Growth strategy be changed from low to high. 2. Growth scenario be changed from consolidation to mixed. And 3. Add a new footnote to Orford, note 1. Refer to the Tribunal Orford Structure Plan 2014 and 2021 addendum. B. Notify the other planning authorities in the southern region of the amendment and seek their advice on whether they support the proposed amendment within 28 days. C. Notify relevant statutory agencies as advised for the local provision schedule of the amendment and seek their advice on whether they support the proposed amendment within 28 days. And D. Provide delegation under section 6(3) of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993 to the General Manager and Director of Planning and Development or person acting in that position to submit the amendment to the Tasmanian Planning Commission and any further information that is required to satisfy section 5A of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993.
Thank you, Councillor Arnold. Is there a second? Councillor Branning. Councillor Arnold, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, not at all. Thank you, Mayor. I think the report was very comprehensive and
Councillor Robinson.
I'm not necessarily speaking for or against, Mayor, but through you, I've got some queries and issues with this report and the recommendation. I've read the SGS report quite comprehensively, and I'm not convinced that some of the information in there is necessarily what's happening on the ground in Orford. The recommendation suggests that the growth strategy for the town of Orford be changed from low to high. In the regional land use strategy, the high ratings usually was reserved in that strategy. I realise it was 2008 that it was done. The high ratings reserved for major district centres with populations of 5,000 or more. Orford's designated as a town in that regional land use strategy. In that report, the regional land use strategy, Bichno and Swansea highlighted as for strategic growth as moderate, whereas Orford is low. I agree that perhaps Orford should be higher, but certainly not high. Bichno and Swansea are designated tourism industry and holiday home towns, whereas Orford's designated as merely a holiday home town, and 68% of homes in Orford at the moment are holiday homes. So to change that rating for strategic growth from low to high, I think flies in the face of that regional land use strategy where it designates major district centres as the only ones that are designated as high. According to the SGS report too, Orford will need a further 298 dwellings by 2035. I've had a good look through the report. I'm not convinced that that assumption is necessarily correct. That's roughly 20 new dwellings a year from 2020 to cater for demand. The regional land use strategy predicts 71. I suspect over the last 2 years that the number of new dwellings built would be probably less than 40, looking at 20 a year. The SGS report also claims there's a vacant land shortage in Orford. I don't necessarily believe that's so. Our council here has approved 5 subdivisions over the past few years, which totals around 80 blocks for possible dwellings. And if you look at those 80 blocks, some have been sold. The subdivision near the Bowls Club, some of those have already been sold. And what developers tend to do, and the other 4 that we've got on our books, they tend to drip feed their blocks for sale, depending on demand and when they try and recoup their costs in the first instance. Of the around 80 blocks that will be on the market or are already sold, none, I suspect, will be built this year. Maybe with a drip feed from those developments, the demand for the next 3 to 5 years might be met without changing that growth strategy from low to high. And also without putting undue pressure on our water and sewerage. I know that other councillors here that are aware of the situation in Orford are pretty concerned about that, and I certainly am too. The SGS report also suggests that a change of growth strategy to high will encourage a more permanent population. I fail to see how that would apply, given the lack of job prospects in the Orford Township at the moment. Also, on top of the expensive nature of the property and land in Orford. A place, for example, opposite the Blue Waters Hotel was for sale for around $900,000 about a month ago. That's gone. A place in Charles Street, in the main street of Orford, 3 to 4 bedroom house, sold for $810,000 in the space of a month. So I think people moving here to live as permanent residents without a job, it's not likely to happen. Retirements, yes, but people would still have to have quite a deal of money. The SGS report also indicates that more rezoning and subdivisions can require infrastructure for services. It can require new infrastructure for services, but how that would be pursued is not indicated. And I think there are many other assumptions made in that SGS report, which this whole motion is based on, in the following motion. And I don't think, for one, as a councillor myself, we've not had enough time to really go through this SGS report and all the additional attachments that we've had to look at with it. And I would prefer that we have a workshop on that rather than make any sort of definite decision on that today. Thank you, Mayor.
Any other? Councillor Branning.
Thank you, Mayor. Having listened to Councillor Robinson's comments, I don't necessarily agree with the tenet of it, but I was reassured in listening to the report and with workshops that all us councillors have managed to have, that this amendment was a strategy to make sure that council didn't fail to amend the RLUS as required by Section 5A of the Local Government Land Use Planning and Approvals Act, subsection 6 and 7, that require us to make sure that we keep our strategies up to date. My concern is that failure to do that tends to lead us to the loss of potential for controlled development in an area. It's correct to say that, as Councillor Robinson has iterated, that there are different ways that developers provide lots to townships, and the way that townships are allocated, as whether or not it's a regional town or it's a development area, and we're not in control of that. The Tasmanian Regional Land Use Strategy is a strategy, and it's controlled by issues that we are able to manage here as a council, and that is the planning schemes, the zonings, our discretionary use as a planning authority. I don't condone rampant development, but I do believe that stagnation or a lack of development, potential, that is the potential for development, whether it happens or whether it doesn't is not part of this strategy. It's making sure that there is the potential for it if it should happen. And a lack of that can lead to degradation of the community and lead to regional stagnation itself. I'm not convinced that moving from a low rating to a high rating is necessarily a bad thing, although I would like to ask, if I could, the report author, if I could question that person in regards to why the intermediate of moderate was not considered as a first step. Is it possible to ask that question, please?
I'm sure it would be.
Mick, did you hear that?
Thank you. Yes, I did hear that question, and I do have an answer if you would like one.
Please give it.
Please.
So the Southern Tasmanian Regional Land Use Strategy establishes a low growth scenario as up to 10%, a medium growth scenario as between 10 and 20%, and a high growth scenario between 20 and 30%. Now, based on the figures in the Spiller-Gibbons-Swan report, we know that there were at least 135 additional dwellings added over the 7-year period. So the Regional Land Use Strategy establishes that when it was approved there were 716 dwellings in Orford, and under the low growth strategy allows a 10% increase over the 25-year life of that document. So that would let council add, in theory, another 71 dwellings. The medium growth scenario would allow twice that at 142, and the high growth scenario would allow 3 times that at 213. So when you look at the historical growth within the suburb, which is 135 dwellings, it doesn't fit within either the low or the medium scenarios established under the Regional Land Use Strategy. Has that answered your question?
Succinctly, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Purvis. Is there any other comment or discussion? Councillor Churchill.
Yes, if I may, Mayor. I'm just interested to know, I'm seeing a lot of figures here, but a lot of them don't make sense to me because I'm not sure where we are right now. I'd like to know how many dwellings are occupied in Orford or under construction. That'd be a nice number to have the whole lot. But if I can get an approximation of how many houses or how many dwellings are actually here now that are occupied.
I mean permanently or...
That are built and occupied, either permanently, part-time, whatever.
So how many dwellings for habitation exist in this area?
Correct.
Is that correct?
We've got figures there that are obviously fairly accurate for 2010 when they were put there. I think that number was 700 and something. 716. I'd just like to know how many there are now so that we can get some sort of idea of what the numbers are for the next 10 to 15 years.
Well, I see Mr. Bonner, our planner, wriggling in the background. Do you know an answer to that?
No, probably best to ask
Mr. Purvis? Mr. Purvis, did you hear the question?
I did, but I didn't hear Mr. Bonner's response. I'm assuming he just
said ask
asked it
you.
to me.
Handball.
Right, okay. So the Australian Bureau of Statistics records a lot of statistics for dwellings. So we know that in 2016 there were 851 dwellings in Orford. Unfortunately, this morning we haven't been able to pull the detailed figures together to work out exactly how many dwellings are in Orford today, either finished and occupied or under construction. So I'm afraid I can't give you that number at the present point.
So, Mick, that is an increase, what you've just said, that is an increase of 100 dwellings over how many years? 100 dwellings over 6 years from 2010?
Yes.
Yeah.
which equates to an average number of new dwellings per year of 19 or 22 and a half, depending upon how you count the numbers statistically. That's per year.
Mr Churchill, Councillor Churchill, does that answer your question?
That answers my question, sort of. I would have liked
To ask another one.
I would have liked a more up-to-date figure, but that's okay. I just need to get my head around what the actual numbers of housing that we are expecting to actually require between now and 2035. This plan was designed to run from 2010 to 2035 over that 25-year period, and we're only about we're about halfway, getting close to halfway through, and I'm just wondering how these figures work. In my head, I was having a bit of a struggle trying to work out how many houses we actually needed, how many we've got, and how much more land we really need to open up, and how we do that. I guess having read it and looked at it and considered it in relation to the other comparable townships in the southern region, I find it very difficult to request or to make logic of why we should go beyond that moderate growth strategy. I guess that's what I'm really struggling a little bit with, and remembering that what we decide now can be changed in 5 years or whatever, because there's still a lot of lots out there. The 80-odd that Councillor Robinson's referred to, I'm sure, isn't the entire amount that's available out there. So I'm just not sure that we're at a point in time where we should be asking the TPC to go straight from low to a high strategy when there's no other part of the southern region, which this is all about the southern region as well. We're trying to get some consistency here, is actually categorised as high in the township category.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to make any comment or either for or against the motion, or ask a question?
Just a final point, Mayor. With that 80 that I've identified, possible new dwellings, and as I said, I don't think there's been anything actually built as a new dwelling on those subdivisions yet. One of them's not even on the market at the moment. I'd be interested from a planner's point of view, maybe Mick Purvis or someone else, as to how they see those 80 blocks and what sort of time frame we're looking at and what sort of demand there may be for those. And I don't think that's been identified.
Thank you for that. I have a couple of comments to make, and maybe Mick Purvis, our consultant planner, could answer your queries and possibly some of the queries I pose. First of all, it's said that developers might drip feed the blocks onto the market. I ask the question, if there are more subdivisions, then would that not have the effect of preventing a drip feed and perhaps increase the supply of blocks onto the market? The next thing is, the Southern Tasmanian Land Use Strategy was prepared some years ago, and it was a bit of a clairvoyant guess to work out what was likely to be the demand in the future, and it turned out to be, as far as I can see in my limited knowledge, a guess that was way off the mark, because it imagined that the demand for blocks would have been far less than it happens to be. And the third thing is, if we unduly restrict now the blocks that are available on the market, even now in the next few years, even though we can apply to amend our area plan, would it not have a tendency, if the demand keeps coming the way it has in the recent past, would it not have a tendency to push the price of land up and thus make it more difficult for those that want to buy a block and build? The questions I ask, Mr. Purvis, do you want to answer Councillor Robinson's question and make any comment on the questions that I've raised?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I might actually go back slightly to one of Councillor Churchill's questions, asking why we had to go from low to high on the growth strategy. So the SGS report identifies that from 2010 to 2016 there were 135 additional dwellings approved in that period. Now, bear in mind the medium growth strategy that has been talked about today only allows between 10 and 20% growth, which is a maximum of 142. So changing to a medium growth scenario won't even recognise the growth that occurred basically up to 2016, 2017. That's why we need to go to a high growth scenario so that there is that capacity there for future growth over the next 15 years. Now, the 80 blocks that are on the market at the moment are a part of the current capacity that was identified in the SGS report of between 228 and 303 lots that are available to the market. Now, those figures range because the SGS report took external advice from land surveyors who do subdivisions on a routine basis on what the potential of the available land in Orford was. And if you actually go through the SGS report on pages 13, 14 and 15, there is a table that identifies their range of figures there. And the interesting thing is if you look at that, table 5, the vacant lots that are available now are basically at 100% consistency between the two. The difference comes with the ease that land can be developed with between existing servicing capacity and future constraints. And those figures are about 2/3 of what they would be if there's no restrictions. So the low figures, which is the more constrained version, end up with the 228 as the total potential lots in Orford, and they range up to 303 if there were no limitations. So the 80 lots that are on the market now are part of that existing capacity. The problem is, at some point we're going to run out of that capacity and then there won't be any further subdivision that is reasonably possible in the Orford area, and that's when we'll start to strike problems if we haven't planned for that scenario. Councillor Robinson, has that answered your question?
Yeah, I guess to a point. I still have a query about the demand in the Orford area for land. I guess I know the SGS report makes some assumptions and has talked to land surveyors and developers and so on, but I guess I'm not seeing that demand on the ground over the past couple of years for blocks of land.
Would you like me to respond to that point?
Yes,
Well, if
yes,
you can say something,
yeah,
yes,
sure.
or Mr. Purvis, please do.
Thank you. So the period 2010 to 2016 demonstrates that about 20 houses per year were approved in the Orford area per year, which is consistent with the totals that they're projecting for the future growth of the Orford area in the SGS report. So that is discounting the approval statistics over the last 5 years, because they are part of the 2016 census data. So I think we actually have a basic demonstration that there is a demand for about 20 houses per year in the Orford area. And that is consistent with what SGS are proposing as part of this process. Has that answered the question?
Yes, thanks, Mick.
Isn't that also consistent, Mick, with the fact that there's a housing shortage right now? And I mean, there's people, particularly down here in the south, and there's people looking for accommodation. There's no one here that seems to be building investment homes, for example. I mean, we got staff that are, you know, including myself, still looking for accommodation.
Yes, look, that is an issue in Glamorgan Spring Bay, and it is also, there is evidence to suggest it is a wider issue across Tasmania. We appear to have two problems with our housing market at the moment. The first one is affordability, i.e. what people can afford to pay, and the second one is availability, and that is exactly what you just described, Mr. General Manager, being able to find a house in the first spot, regardless of whether you're looking to buy or to rent. So the only way to address those two issues in the short term is to provide more land available for development so that the housing market can respond to it. The other thing is we are tending to notice that the market has changed over the last few years. So instead of a more traditional expectation of X number of houses per year being built, what we're tending to see is stages of subdivision are simply taken up when they're released. So it's a fundamental change in the way that the market is operating, and that means there is generally less land available for people to develop their own house on. We don't have a short-term answer for fixing that particular problem, but I suspect the pending reviews of the population data that the state is planning to do over the next couple of years to inform future review of the regional land use strategy will start to confirm those issues that have emerged, and then the regional land use strategies in the planning system will be able to work out how they respond to that particular issue.
Thank you, Mr. Purvis, very much. Is there any other discussion?
Just, can I just have one more point? I've probably spoken enough, but
Speak up anyway.
this is to Mick Purvis too. If this scenario is agreed to, can you see Bicheno and Swansea also being changed from moderate, or suggested to be changed from moderate to high as well, given that there's a huge demand there as well?
Well, I'm going to rule that it's not relevant, and therefore, Mr. Purvis, please don't answer that hypothetical, even though it might be important in the future. But it's not germane to Orford, I don't think. I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried. I note that Councillor Churchill and Councillor Robinson voted against. All the rest attended, voted in favour. Next item is 4.3, page 35. Request to amend the Orford structure plan. Can I have a motion? Councillor Brenning.
Thank you, Mayor. I recommend that I move that the Planning Authority make the following amendments to the Triabunna Orford Structure Plan 2014. A. Include a new endorsement to the inner cover. Amendment 1, August 2021, insert Attachment 1 and associated document Orford Residential Capacity and Demand Analysis, final, January 2021, SGS Economics and Planning. B, page 3, include Attachment 1, Statement and Orford Residential Capacity and Demand Analysis Final, January 2021, SGS Economics and Planning. C, page 63, revise Recommended Action 9.2.2.3 to support rezoning land south of Orford to residential in the short term rather than the long term. And D, page 74, include additional reference SGS Economics and Planning 2021 Orford Residential Capacity and Demand Analysis final, January 2021. B. Insert a new attachment 1, being the 14 July 2021 statement, Addendum to Triabunna/Orford Structure Plan 2014, and the associated document Orford Residential Capacity and Demand Analysis final, January 2021, SGS Economics and Planning.
Is there a seconder? Deputy Mayor Woods. Any discussion? Yes, Councillor Churchill.
I just want to, I guess I'm having a little bit of difficulty even understanding the recommendation. That's possibly due to my inability to comprehend it. But I can see how this, the structure plan needs to work with the land use strategy, and I quite understand that. I guess I'm not really clear about the I guess all of the parts, the A, B, C, D and E of this recommendation. I don't know how other councillors feel about that, but I was just wondering whether perhaps our planner would be prepared to briefly go through those if others in the room feel that way. If it's only me, that's fine. But if others in the room feel that they might need that, perhaps our planner would like to go through those things and point them out to us as to so that I know exactly what I am voting for or against.
Mr. Purvis, did you hear that query?
I did, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm more than capable of responding.
Please respond.
Thank you. So, Councillor Churchill, what I might ask you to do is to flip those in your mind, just flip those recommendations upside down. So if we start with E, what we're proposing to do is actually include attachment 1
Okay.
that is following this report,
The easy bit, yes.
and then also include the SGS report on the Orford Residential Capacity and Demand Analysis. So as a result of that, page 74 of the structure plan itself needs to have a revision to include additional references. In this case, it's one of the reference documents to the report. Page 63, there's a set of actions about the future development in the Orford area, and what recommendation C proposes to do is change the actions at 9.2.2 so that this area in the southeastern area of Orford is promoted from a long-term action to a short-term action. And A and B in the recommendation are simply consequential amendments as a result of the previous 3 items. I do apologise, I should have reordered them in the recommendation so that that was clearer. Have I answered the question?
Yes, fairly well. If you could just explain to me under C what the impact is of the short-term versus the long-term.
Okay, so at the moment, the recommendation includes an action, a future action in the long term for rezoning land south of Orford.
The long-term, sorry, Mick, to interrupt, the long-term meaning how long?
That's not really defined. So normally in planning perspectives, long-term would be 10 plus years. So if you think about it, this report was released and then updated in 2014. So we're now 7 years on from when these recommendations were put out there. So we're actually almost at the point where it would be time to start looking at rezoning this land anyway. But what we need to do is change the recommendation at 9.2.2 to reflect the time and the development that has occurred over the last 7 years. So the item C in the recommendation is simply changing that time frame for something to occur with that land.
So it's just bringing it forward.
Yes.
Okay.
Councillor Brenning.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to follow up on our consultant's comments in relation to the order of the recommendation, the motion that I made. I would be quite happy to make what is a very convoluted and difficult to understand situation a little easier to understand if we changed the motion references and reversed them. Is that an equitable solution, if I could ask through you, Mayor, the consultant?
Yes, Mr. Purvis, please respond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that is a great suggestion.
So the motion E becomes A, D becomes B, C remains, B becomes D, and A becomes E.
I'll just have to ensure that our executive assistant moves them all about quickly enough. We'll wait. Councillor Brennick, can you see on the screen? Does it yet meet your satisfaction or not quite?
Absolutely perfect. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Oh, yes. Oh, my apologies. I should have asked Deputy Mayor whether she agrees with the proposed reordering.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor, do you?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry to miss you out. Please accept my apology. Is there any other discussion on the matter? I put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Now, I think the next item is on page 44, am I correct?
4.4.
Report on representations to substantial modifications of the draft Glamorgan Spring Bay Council local provisions schedule. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Brennan.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that the Planning Authority endorse Attachment 1, Planning Authority Report under Section 35F of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993, consideration of representations to the draft Glamorgan Spring Bay Local Provisions Schedule, August 2021, as its report pursuant to Section 35F of the Act and forward to the Tasmanian Planning Authority, Planning Commission. Sorry.
Is there a Councillor Robinson, second? Does anyone wish to speak for or against the motion? Well, seeing there's no discussion, I put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Now, the next item
But just declare the end of the planning session.
is please go ahead, Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that council no longer acts as a planning authority at 3 p.m.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Robinson. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. The next item is on...
Excuse me, Mayor, could you please pass on my thanks to the consultant planner for his attention
Thank
to
you,
this?
Mr Purvis. Thank you for bringing my attention to it. My apologies once again for omitting it. Mr Purvis, once again, very valuable, most needed. Thank you. Now, I think that's planning matters, so we might say goodbye to Mr Purvis unless you'd like to hear on YouTube, which would be quite happy to occur.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
Now, financial reports, page 47. for the period ending 31 July 2021. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Churchill.
I move that Council receives and notes the financial reports as attached to this report for the period ended 31st of July 2021.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Simons. Councillor Churchill, do you wish to say anything?
Only that I've been through the reports and everything seems in order to me and I have no questions. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any queries or questions or comments? Well, seeing that's the case, I put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. The next item is on page 49, 7.1, Information Reports, Director, Works and Infrastructure, Mr Porch. Can I have a motion? Councillor Robinson, thank
The
you.
council notes the information.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Brenning, do you wish to speak to the motion or do you have any comments? Mr Robinson, Councillor Robinson. Councillor Brenning.
Just a brief comment. I'm noticing that the way that the reports are being presented, this report is presented, and others, I presume, makes it a lot easier for me to understand just what's being done and the workload of the staff. And it's very reassuring to see the spread of it. You know, it's quite a substantial work list. Thank you.
Well, I'd have to concur with that. Any other comments? I do know, Mr Porch, that I had a grumble this morning about stormwater overflows from the Tasman Highway beyond our jurisdiction, but it's still causing some concern. But there's not much that the council can do about that apart from complain to state growth, perhaps. I put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. The next item, 53, on page 53, item 8, Bicheno Skate Park. The report from Director, Works and Infrastructure, Mr Porch.
I'd like to move.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to move that Council provide the BCDA with a letter of in-principle support for the establishment of a skate park in Bicheno, and to endorse the Tasman Highway site as a preferred location for the skate park.
Is there a seconder? Yes, Councillor Simons. Thank you. Well, it's an interesting report. It's a matter that's been around for a long time. So, Deputy Mayor, would you like to speak?
Yes, I would if I could, please,
Please.
Mayor. Councillors will note that I did not include number 3 in the motion that was recommended, simply because this is, as you have just stated, been going on for so long and there's been so many reports. The BCDA, in my opinion, have done a fabulous job in consulting with the community, getting all sorts of reports presented to us and to the community as well, and I just think it's time that we moved on with it, especially for the community and the kids that are still growing and going to be there for a long time. So at that Community Connect there was a mention about it. It was quite humbling to see the kids and their passion for what they would like for their community being encouraged to voice their opinions as well.
And I did it beautifully in
They
unison, didn't they?
Yeah. So that being said, that's all I have to say
Thank
until
you.
I have to close.
Councillor Churchill, you wish to say something?
Yes, if I may, Mayor. I just think that council needs to convey the message to the community that we're now in a position that we weren't in 12 months ago when this was put to us before, where we now know and we understand our financial position. We've got our long-term financial plan in place. We know our assets and what they're costing us now because we've been right through the asset management plan, and hopefully we are now in a position to support this sort of development, knowing where we are positioned, and it's nice to be able to have that feeling. And we've got numbers around it now. We've got an estimate of $750,000 for this development to be done. I assume that is very much an estimate, but and that may vary over time. And we now have an estimate of what this will cost the ratepayers, and the community needs to have an understanding of that. It will cost each ratepayer approximately $10 per ratepayer per year to have this facility in the community. And I think the community would probably be behind this now. It's certainly a different situation to what we were in 12 months ago.
Thank you, Councillor Churchill. Does anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Brenny.
Thank you, Mayor. I note that one of the issues that was raised in the original presentation, or the original approach to council for the approval of this, was the location of the site, and that became a question in this motion, which has been overlooked, thankfully. The idea was, or the situation was made known to councillors that State Growth was hesitant about the location of it because of its proximity to Tasman Highway. From an engineering point of view and from a planning design point of view, I would have thought that approximately 30 metres of interface between Tasman Highway and this project was more than enough room to ensure that some sort of safety devices, if required, could be installed. Given that, for example, up the road at the Bicheno Triangle, the interface between the highway and the facility is zero. I'm sure that anybody who has an issue with the location being adjacent to Tasman Highway would be reassured that a decent design would be put forward in final development applications for this to ensure that the safety of the users of the site was maintained. I'm reassured and will be supporting that situation. While I'm mentioning it, on the page 56, the plan that shows the diagram of the proposal, I understand that it would be a concept plan, but just a thought, item 5 indicates a natural surface adventure bike path. It seems that whether it's just a design thing or something that hasn't been looked at, there is a pathway proposed between the car park to the foreshore walking track that seems to, by default, indicate that it's a bike track. Just for the sake of the designers who are coming up with the actual finished design, that walking track is prohibited to bicycles. So I would suggest that some sort of action be taken to ensure that there is no misconception that that pathway is for bicycles to access the foreshore walking track. Apart from that, finally, I'd just like to say that I hope this project manages to get started and comes to fruition, if only as a mark of respect and thanks to Jenny Logie, who has had a lot to do with the development of this over the last, I think, 12 years or so, who will be leaving Bicheno relatively shortly. Hopefully she can see this as being one of the achievements. Thank you.
Thank you to Councillor Brenny. Are you content that I put the motion? All those in favour?
Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Go, Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. The only comment I want to make is I'm very pleased to see this actually on our agenda. Thank Mr. Torch for his report. Some 20 years ago,
Your microphone's not on. No, put,
some 20...
It's not on.
No, still not on? There we go. Sorry. I'll start again. I'm very pleased to see this report on the agenda, and I thank Mr. Porch for his report. Some 20 years ago, there was a delegation came to a council meeting in the Bicheno Hall for just this very project. And now I think some of those children who came to the council meeting are probably parents of the kids who came to our recent Community Connect session. So I just want to congratulate council, the BCDA, and everybody else involved in this whole project for having the wherewithal to keep going with it. And let's move on.
Thank you very much, Councillor Arnold. I put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. The next item is on page 57, the unsealed roads policy. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Robinson, thank you.
Council adopt the draft unsealed roads policy.
Is there a seconder for the motion? Deputy Mayor Woods, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Only briefly through you, Mayor, that we have had a workshop on this policy, and it's quite comprehensive, and I think it's great that we've got a policy now that prioritises our unsealed roads, and it's something that hopefully we'll be able to follow in due course over the forthcoming years.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wish to speak? I put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. The next item on page 59 is Southern Cycle Tender and Joint Authority. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Wood.
Thank you. I'll move that, one, the update on the council's arrangements for the acceptance and processing of all its, commingled recyclable materials be received and noted. 2, authority to provide the General Manager to proceed with the procurement of a new contractor for the processing of commingled recyclable material. 1. In doing so, the General Manager be authorised to work with other councils in Southern Tasmania to develop specifications, call tenders and award tenders in accordance with the assessment of the submissions received by the Tender Review Committee. 2. The General Manager be authorised to work with other councils in Southern Tasmania to ensure ACCC approval is to proceed with joint tender. 3. In accordance with Section 30 of the Local Government Act 1993, the Council resolved to establish a joint authority with other Southern Tasmanian councils to progress waste-related issues. 1. The General Manager to be authorised to work with other councils in Southern Tasmania to progress the establishment of a new joint authority, including the development of rules and governance arrangements for the new joint authority. And 4. A further report be provided to Council detailing the outcome of the tender process and seek formal approval of membership of the joint authority within the next 6 months.
Can I have a seconder? Councillor Arnold, thank you very much. Before we go further with it, could I ask the General Manager, which I imagine that you assisted in drawing the motion, that ACCC is that Australian Competition and Consumer Commission approval for a joint action?
Yes, it is. Yep.
Thank you very much. Do you wish to speak to it, Deputy Mayor?
No, thank you, Mayor. The report pretty much speaks for itself.
Seconded. Councillor Arnold, do you wish to speak? Anyone else wish to speak? Yes, Councillor Churchill.
I just think it's great that this is coming forward, because waste is going to become a big issue going into the future. And I note that somewhere in the reports it talked about a period of 10 years that this plan was going to be over. 10 to 15 years, and I guess initially that concerned me a little bit, because I think waste management is going to change a lot in that 10 to 15 year period. I think we'll be looking at something quite different 10 years from now, and let's hope we will be. Perhaps we'll be looking at ways of processing a lot of this material in a way that's much more sustainable than it is now. But I note in the report that somewhere or other was mentioned that these sort of measures will be looked at by this joint authority through that period. And I think that's really good, and thanks for the report.
Yes, thank you. All those in favour of the motion? Against? Carried unanimously. I hope I'll be around in 10 years to see the result of those matters. Live in hope, I suppose. Deputy Mayor, I heard you giggling at my I'll have you know that some people say the older you get, the wiser you get.
Mr Mayor, would you mind getting on with the job?
Not true. Page 68, item 8.4, gifts and donation policy. Can I have a motion, please? Yes, Councillor Churchill.
I recommend that Council adopt the draft gifts and donations policy.
Is there a seconder, Councillor Simons? Do you wish to speak to the matter, Councillor Churchill?
Yes, I will briefly. Thank you, Mayor. Just to say that there has been some concern that perhaps there's this policy is very, very detailed in its format, which I totally agree with. I believe it's been taken from the model from ELGAT, is that correct? And I think it's certainly something that we need in place. We haven't had what could be called a good gifts and donations policy in place since I've been on council, and it's nice to have this. And I think that in light of the fact that these things take a lot of working and a lot of workshopping for us if we're going to change it, I think there are things of greater priority at the moment. Having said that, we really need to have this, and I think it's timely that we do it. And if we want change down the track, I'd welcome that if was seen to be required. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to speak to the motion? Well, that being the case, I put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Now the next item, notice of motion, there are none. Page 70, item 9. Page 71, item 10, petitions, there are none. There are some questions without notice from councillors. Those questions are to be read on page 72 and 73 and 74. The response from the General Manager has been set forth. Seeing there are no other items of business, yes,
Sorry,
Councillor
Mr Mayor, through
Simons.
you, I just have a couple of comments and,
Yes,
and a couple
please.
of questions without notice, which I'll ask through you to the General Manager.
Yes, please.
With regards to the responses, I thank our General Manager for making the responses, and fortunately or unfortunately I do have some other questions to ask that lead from the answers. With regards to the first question, the comment I would make before the question is that as a councillor, from that answer, I may have potentially been given deficient and incomplete advice. As I advocated in the workshops that are mentioned in the answer, a decision of this magnitude should not have been made on informal advice. in my opinion, what may have been found improper, if proper advice had been taken, was that Brighton Council, Georgetown Council and Glamorgan Spring Bay Council has not had a certificate issued annually for the last 8 years. The Director of Local Government has not requested one. The same three councils are also excluded under the Local Government Act in 1993 from having to provide AAR calculations to the Director of Local Government annually. The question that I ask without notice following from that is, could you please advise who tabled this advice and provide a copy of such advice?
Before it's answered, were you at the workshop when the advice was given?
Yes.
My recollection is, and I'm sure it's right, and I'm going to answer this, it was given orally by a consultant that we hired to advise on rates, and that consultant indicated that that consultant had consulted with Mr. Sean McElwain as to the obligations contained in Section 109, capital A, onwards of the Local Government Act, which did deal with the assessed area rating. It was oral, it wasn't in writing. So I think that aspect of your query, I as Mayor have just answered, because I was there at the time. Do you have any other matters you wish to follow from that, Councillor Simons?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, with regards to the second question I asked about some financial advice, I noticed the question was answered. The questions I asked had been answered incorrectly, actually, because the advice that's been given has compared. I asked for comparisons between the 2018-19 financial year, and the responses have been a comparison with the 2019-20 years.
What page was this particular question?
The bottom of
Councillor
page
Simons?
72. Figures are drawn from the audited results of the 2018-2019 accounts, as they would reflect the previous administration and council's decisions. The responses are from 2019-2020. Having said that, I guess the question that comes to mind is, and thank you, Mr General Manager, for providing a particular bit of information there about the NRM wages, which were $176,000 in 2018-19. I'll just mention that there was no mention of the medical practitioners that were paid in that period, and I think in order to make a fair comparison, those wages may need to be excluded. So the question I would ask again is, taking into account the adjusted wages figure of 2018-19 of $3,689,000, not excluding any further deductions for medical practitioner wages, why are the wages in the 2021-2022 budget $1.537 million, or 44% higher than the 2018-19 audited wages? My question still stands on the material and services if compared to the year I asked for, which is 2018-19, and I would like an answer to that question.
That's one point you raised. Do you raise another after that?
Yes, I do.
It's a different
With regards
question.
to the last
I'm
question.
going to ask
It's a different question. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm going to ask that the General Manager respond to that particular question, which will be recorded in writing outside this meeting.
Happy to have him take that on notice.
And the second point, please.
So, with the third question I asked, which was about our borrowings, and
What page is that? Page 73?
What about page 73?
yeah, I think so. Page 73.
Yes.
Yes. Question 3. I thank you for answering those questions, and I say that in response that. Having read your answers, it seems to me that the comments that were made in the council meeting of June 2021, that this council and I quote, inherited unserviceable debt is totally incorrect and misleading for the community.
Can you let us know from whom those comments were made?
Well, it was from a sitting councillor, and if you'd like to look back through the audio, you can find those comments. So
I don't
personally, I
dispute the
prefer not
comments.
to name the councillor
All right.
because that's not what that's about. So, firstly, I thank you again for confirming the Prosser Plains Raw Water Scheme is being paid for by an external party, and the scheme is at cost neutral to the ratepayers and council. The question I have that arises from the answer again is, can you inform me what the general loan of $1.5 million has been used for, and whether those borrowings have taken our borrowing potential as a council to its maximum?
And what, before you go on, could
I've
you
got a
specify?
copy. Sorry, I've got a copy for Jess.
Yeah.
Could you specify for what period? Because there are varying maximums.
I'm just looking on the general line there. We've got a loan amount of $1.5 million.
I can see that.
I understand the
borrowings.
question,
Yep.
Mr Mayor, and I can take that on notice.
Yep.
I understand the question.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Can I just make a comment though on the Prosser raw water scheme, which was a point that you made, Councillor Simons, about the loan repayments, and yes, sure, it does indicate that we are servicing a debt and a repayment there. But the important thing to note with that scheme is at a point in time in the future, there's going to be a need to carry out maintenance and upgrades of the system. Whilst it's still new, whilst it's still relatively new, that isn't a cause for concern. But in terms of our asset management plan and the fact that the system itself makes up probably half of all our total fixed assets in hydraulics, there will be a point in time down the track when council will be funding renewals and maintenance on this asset, which sit above.
Thank you
obviously,
very
the loan
much,
repayment.
General Manager.
Point taken. Thank you.
So that, and otherwise, General Manager, you'll write to Mr Simons setting out the answers to the queries. I imagine it'll be about 21 days or more before you'll be able to get around to doing that. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I will be able to respond quicker than that. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr Simons, any other? Councillor Simons?
Lastly, just to do with the loan graph there that we've got, it relates to the marina, and again, to my untrained eye, I'll admit that there seems to be a steady decline in the revenue of the marina from a high of $350,000 in 2019 down to $310,000 in 2021. In that same period, we've had wages and depreciation have increased. Could you provide some advice around these concerns? And I'd also ask, did the closure of the Visitor Information Centre at Triabunna have any effect on the revenue stream at the marina and wharf? Because that may be why the revenue's dropped, I'm unsure.
So, as I understand it, Councillor Simons, there's a question there. You want some specificity about it, some detail. And the second comment was suggestive of an answer, perhaps.
Exactly. Thank you.
Is there any other question that you raise, any other matter relating to this item?
No.
11?
No, that's all I have, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Now we come to item 12, close. Well, I suppose I have to have a motion, please. Can someone let me have a motion about closure?
No, you just declare
Well,
it.
I declare the meeting closed at 3:29. Number half.
I'll go 3:20.
3:30.
Now, and that is, we have no more business, have we not? Switched us off?